Chapter 18. Classes remained suspended in the fall of 1966, and university students spent their time making revolution. Middle schools and primary schools resumed their regular schedule. My older brother and I returned to our school, and my little brother, Yi-chun, was sent to the child care center. But the Cultural Revolution increasingly affected our lives. Children from black families were singled out for even greater segregation, harassment, and punishment. The teachers turned a blind eye to the activities of the red students or collaborated with them. The persecuted black students found safety and solace only in one another. Even 3-year-old Yi-chun was a target for hate. He became quiet at home and was reluctant to go to the center. He clung to our mother and cried when she dropped him off. One morning, she returned to the center and peeked inside. She watched, sickened with dismay, as the teacher led Yi-chun to a potty chair in the corner of the room. He was ordered to take off his pants and stay there. After that, the teacher paid no attention to him, and none of the other children played with him. Our parents gave Yi-chun special attention at home to make up for his mistreatment at the center. But there was no one in a position of authority to whom they could complain. My parents didn't know what happened to me at school, and I could only guess what my older brother experienced. He played chess against himself each afternoon and evening when he'd finished his homework. On weekends, he'd sit quietly hour after hour, moving methodically from one side of the table to the other, lost in his game. I had a companion in misery, my best friend Xiaolan. At school, we shared a common label, Daughters of the Damned. Her father was labeled a historic anti-revolutionary for having served in the Nationalist Army during the war against the Japanese. Xiaolan's name meant Little Magnolia, and it fit her perfectly. She was moon-faced, with thick black hair that she wore in long braids. Her skin seemed to glow every time she smiled. She looked like those children who appeared in propaganda posters illustrating the glory of China. When Xiaolan and I began 3rd grade together that autumn, the hatred of other students for us, little cow demons and snake spirits, initially took the form of teasing. Students, older and younger, sneered and called us names. Sometimes one of them threw a rock at us when our backs were turned. When we looked to see who had done it, a group of students stared back at us and snickered and made defiant gestures. The boys pulled our hair or tried to pull down our trousers and underwear. Quickly, they became bolder. I arrived at school one morning, opened my desk, and found a large dead rat inside. I was horrified and jumped back. The students watched my reaction with glee. I picked up the rat by its long tail and walked out of the room and threw it into the schoolyard. In the next days, other dead animals, sparrows, mice, and toads were left inside my desk. When I pretended the pranks didn't bother me, it infuriated them. They realized from watching Red Guards that escalation of harassment was warranted when someone refused to be cowed. The teachers and other students saw what was happening. The teachers looked the other way. The red students were delighted. They called themselves Little Red Guards, and in their sentiments and lust for inflicting pain on others, they were like grown-ups. They turned when I entered the room, watched as I opened my desk, and giggled or guffawed when I stepped back after finding what was inside. They leered as I walked from the room, waiting for the pleasure of seeing me lose my composure. The other black children stared down at their desks, fearing they might be next. Xiaolan was subject to similar indignities. Like me, she struggled to remain strong. One day, I found a lump of human excrement wrapped in paper in my desk. I gagged. Students near me grabbed their noses and hooted and pointed and backed away. I put down my books, took the edges of the paper, walked out the door, and deposited the mess in the latrine. I paused for a moment to fight back tears. Xiaolan appeared. She hugged me and said, "Don't cry. It will only make them happy." I returned to my desk and dutifully joined in the recitation of the quotations of Chairman Mao. "The world is yours as well as ours. But in the last analysis, it's yours. You, young people, full of vigor and vitality, are in the bloom of life, like the sun at 8 or 9 in the morning. Our hope is placed on you. The world belongs to you. China's future belongs to you." The teacher recited a few words, and we shouted them back at her. We did this each day until we had committed hundreds of quotations to memory. We can learn what we did not know. We're not only good at destroying the old world, we're also good at building the new. The teasing and attacks moved from the school to the street. The red children began waiting for me after class and followed me, chanting, "Little rightist," and "Little stinking ninth." There were 9 categories of class enemies: landlords, rich peasants, counter-revolutionaries, bad elements, rightists, traitors, spies, capitalist roaders, and the 9th and worst category, intellectuals. Intellectuals were referred to by Mao as the stinking ninth. I stared straight ahead and kept walking. My rigid indifference only emboldened my detractors. They walked closer, surrounding me, crowding me. Some spat on me. As the Cultural Revolution became more violent among the adults, so did the attack by children on children. On the way home each afternoon, I watched Red Guards leading lines of men and women like cattle. Red Guards berated them, beat them, knocked them to their knees, and commanded them to recite quotations from Qianmen Mao or make self-condemnations. Crowds of adults and children watched this wretched carnival of misery with what seemed to be gleeful contempt and enraptured detachment. One afternoon, I was followed by a group of students taunting me. A boy ran up to me and punched me hard in the back. It took my breath away. "Stinking rightist! Stinking rightist!" a girl shouted as she ran circles around me. A boy charged and struck me in the back of the head. "Stupid girl!" he yelled. "Stay away from our classroom." My ears were ringing. The street seemed to undulate under my feet. I looked at the boy and saw the hate and rapture in his face. A girl grabbed my school bag and threw my notebook, books, and papers onto the street. I picked up the bag and ran to gather the spilled contents. One paper floated out of my reach each time I stopped to pick it up. "Just look at that dancing idiot!" a boy screamed, and the others doubled over in laughter. Another girl, her face flushed with hate, hurried over, stepped on the paper, and grabbed a fistful of my hair. I fell to the cement. I got to my feet and stuffed the soiled papers into my bag. The girl and her friends gathered close around me, legs spread, hands on hips, jaws jutting out, defying me to break their circle. I stepped in one direction, and the boy blocked my way. They began to chant, "Little black bitch, little black bitch, little black bitch." Something snapped. I lashed out with my bag. Catching a boy in the face, I leaped forward and grabbed a girl by the hair, jerked her head down, and pulled it from side to side as she howled. In a flash, the others were on my back, pummeling me, pulling my hair, punching my arms. I held on to the girl's hair like someone possessed. I was unafraid. As the others beat and battered me, I swung my bag and punched wildly with my fist. I bared my teeth and snapped at them. Finally, someone tripped me, and I stumbled and fell flat on my back. Stunned, I paused for my head to clear. They stood over me, uncertain what to do next. The girl screamed for them to kill me. But she had edged away several safe feet. The biggest boy, panting, fists clenched at his side, looked down at me and spat. "Stupid little righteous bitch!" He turned and wrapped his arm around his weeping companion. The group moved on, singing songs of Chairman Mao's quotations. My arms, legs, and face were scraped and bruised. I was crying and trembling so I could hardly stand. I sat on the curb, gasping for air. I clasped my hands together tightly to steady them. What happened? I asked myself. Where had my strength, my courage, my incredible rage come from? At home, I washed my soiled clothing and sewed up the tear in my shirt before Mama saw it. I examined my scalp in the mirror and found a bald spot where the hair had been pulled out. I gathered my hair around the spot and used a rubber band to make a ponytail. I told Xiaolan what had happened. She laughed about my fighting back, but warned, "Mama, now you're really going to get it." Together, we conspired to postpone their retribution. We circled the campus, searching for a way to get out without going through the main gate. We found a weak spot in the campus wall, concealed partially by shrubbery. The mortar had disintegrated and bricks had become loose. We pulled out several bricks near the base of the wall and made a hole large enough for each of us to squeeze through. We crawled out the hole and took a new route to school. Nobody followed us that day. The next morning, we met outside Xiaolan's apartment building and hurried to our secret exit. After we'd slipped through it, we looked down the street toward the main gate and saw several of the students who'd chased me lingering in the street. I pointed them out to Xiaolan, and we had to cover our mouths to stifle our laughter. We ran through the alleys and down side streets we'd never taken before to get to school. This became our regular route. We eventually gave the crescent-shaped hole in the wall a name: Moon Gate. We evaded our tormentors for the next few weeks. We hoped they'd tire of looking for us. But before long, we got into trouble with another group. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. One of our most malicious classmates was a tall, temperamental girl named Sun Maomao. Her father had been provost of the university. He was a powerful man who freely used his position for personal advantage. His family lived a life of luxury. Even in hard times, they ate well. My parents were high on his hate list. At a political meeting of the university faculty and staff a few years earlier, the provost gave a long speech, a directive as well as a criticism about birth control. My parents had 2 children at the time, and my mother was expecting a 3rd. Looking straight at her, he said that the best policy for black families was a one-child policy. Having more than 1 child, said the father of 6, is irresponsible and unpatriotic for a black family. Such people who produce more than 1 child will suffer dire consequences. One morning, Xiaolan and I were playing quietly in a corner of the schoolyard before class started. We found that when we pulled up a clump of crabgrass and cleaned off the roots, we could chew them and extract a sweet-tasting juice. While we chewed the roots, we wove the blades of grass into a bird's nest, perched on our knee on the ground. We talked about the birds that would come and lay eggs in our nest. We imagined how they would look. Their wonderful colors, the size and color of the eggs, and the number of baby birds we could watch. There were almost no birds in the city. 8 years earlier, a fanatical campaign had succeeded in exterminating wild birds in the cities and the countryside because Chairman Mao believed they were pests that ate crops that might otherwise be consumed by people. Xiaolan was wearing a new white blouse with tiny blue flowers printed on it. Her mother had made it, and Xiaolan was quite pleased with it. The bell rang. We ran to class. Xiaolan held the nest in her hands. She didn't want to drop it, and she would get into trouble if she brought it inside the classroom. She shouted, "Mama, look!" I turned to see her fling it high into the air, as though it were a bird rather than a nest, and would take flight. As it left her hands, it came apart into wet roots and blades of grass. Behind us came Sun Mao Mao. The disintegrating nest rained down on her. She was furious. She sprang at Xiaolan, grabbed her by the collar, and slapped her twice across the face and shrieked, "How dare you! You rotten little historic anti-revolutionary!" As Xiaolan tried to pull away, Sun Mao Mao jerked her forward. They struggled, and Sun Mao Mao tore off Xiaolan's blouse. I stepped between them and pushed Sun Mao Mao away. She tripped over her own feet. "You rightist bitch!" she screamed. She was about to charge me when Xiaolan jumped in front of me. She was half naked. Sun Mao Mao still clutched the remnants of her new blouse. In the flash, Xiaolan was clawing furiously at Sun Mao Mao's face like a ferocious cat. Sun Mao Mao screamed, dropped the blouse, and covered her face. "My eyes!" she cried, You hurt my eyes! Xiaolan broke off her attack, snatched up her torn blouse, and ran home. Sun Maomao cowered nearby. All 5 of Sun Maomao's siblings attended our school and the nearby middle school. They planned their vengeance methodically, just as the adults did. The next afternoon, Xiaolan and I participated in a rehearsal for our school's Mao Zedong Thought propaganda team. The best singers and dancers in the school were selected to be part of the team and perform on the streets and for other classes and schools. After an hour of singing and dancing, the students and teachers left. Xiaolan and I stayed to sweep the floor and clean the blackboard. We had not yet been forbidden from participating in rehearsals, but we were required to perform extra labor. When we were finished, we gathered up our books and walked to the door and spotted Sun Maomao and her brothers and sisters, the entire Sun brood, waiting for us outside. There they are, Sun Maomao shouted when she saw us. They rushed the door. We scampered back into the classroom, slammed the door shut, and blocked it with the desk. We braced our backs against the desk and held the door closed. The Suns pounded and kicked the door, cursing and making threats. Each time they succeeded in pushing the door open an inch, we pushed back with all of our might. Slowly, the opening became smaller until the sound of expletives and threats from the other side, it clicked shut. Are there just 2 of them? Are you absolutely sure? We heard one of the Suns ask. Our desperation gave us the strength of many. We have all the time in the world. You little black bitches, one of the Sun boys shouted. The longer we wait out here, the worse it is going to be for you. Come out and face your punishment. We had no intention of facing them. Eventually, Sun Maomao's big brother announced, "We'll sit here as long as you are in there, and we'll save our strength for beating the shit out of you." After a long silence, Sun Maomao screamed, "You filthy black bitches had better come out of there, or I'll have my brothers set fire to the building. I'll see you bitches burn." We didn't know what they might do if we went out, but our imaginations were vivid, so we waited quietly while the Suns brayed outside. Hours passed. We heard them whispering and creeping up to the door to test it. The light faded. We soon found ourselves enveloped in darkness, whispering to each other, wondering if our parents might come looking for us. Finally, there was no sound outside. We pulled the door open a crack and peeked outside. We could see no one. We opened it farther to see if that might lure the Suns out of hiding. There was no movement. We decided to make a run for it. We stepped outside and stood very still, watching and listening. The Suns had lost their patience that day, but we knew they would return. They had only postponed our punishment. Xiaolan and I raced to our apartment buildings. We heard chilling chants from a gathering far away. Big character posters pasted on walls and hanging from ropes and wires blew lazily in the breeze like flags or shrubs. The gaunt caricatures on the posters looked down on us like a gallery of ghosts as we hurriedly passed. As I was on my way home from the market one Sunday morning, Sun Maomao and her siblings stepped from an alley and surrounded me. Sun Maomao grabbed my hair, and her brothers and sisters kicked and punched me. The food I was carrying spilled to the ground, and the eggs broke. The oldest boy proclaimed loudly, "You are Xiaolan's friend. For every hair Xiaolan pulled from my sister, you will pay with 10. They pulled out my hair and kicked me until I stopped resisting, and they tired of beating me. They picked up the vegetables scattered around me and ran away, laughing and shouting, "Long live the great proletarian cultural revolution!" Xiaolan and I continued to watch out for the Suns. On several afternoons, we were ambushed and chased. Caught alone on the street once, Xiaolan was beaten badly. My only consolation was that Xiaolan and I remained loyal and kind to each other. When I saw Xiaolan each morning, her face was freshly scrubbed, and her clothes had been washed and sewn or patched if they'd been torn. She was always happy to see me. We slipped through our very own moon gate and out into the hostile world together, sister victims in the world of the big revolution. As we ran to school, sheets and shredded fragments of paper blew around us, loosened scraps from old, weather-torn political posters. Sometimes a breeze tore off a corner or an entire poster came loose and flipped and flew down the street. We found ourselves racing it as it twirled and twisted along in the drafts. Or several tattered shreds skirted across our paths, skittered across our paths. At times, the characters were decipherable: enemy, righteous, traitor, death, kill, or a partial accusation, interrupted by a rip in mid-sentence. Fragments of posters caught on our legs, and we giggled and jumped or halted and kicked out our feet in a little dance, trying to free ourselves of the ribbons of soiled and crinkled paper. Then we ran onto school, clutching our book bags while the condemnations swirled past us, shredding, balling up, tearing apart, snagging in the branches of trees or the spokes of bicycles. Adults avoided these remnants of posters as if they were a poison or carried a curse. But Xiaolan and I dashed fearlessly through them. When it rained, the ink on the posters blotted and ran, and the characters were transformed into flowers and clouds and bleeding spots and collages of color, beautiful to see. Sometimes we saw in the blotches human or animal faces that we tried to identify. Sometimes we saw monsters forming in the running ink, and we screamed and ran from them in mock fright as we played our game, pursued by colorful paper. We spent much of our time that autumn and winter playing and planning ways to remain out of harm's way, and to find some bits of security, some companionship beyond the reach of the Sun siblings. One morning after the winter chill began, I waited for Xiaolan outside her apartment for our walk to school. When she appeared, she looked sad. "What's wrong?" I said. "Papa told me I could no longer walk to school with you," he said. "I can't talk to you or play with you," she answered. "Why?" I asked, shocked. "Because, Mama, just because." She fidgeted with her book bag. "Papa said that if people see us talking or playing together, they will say we're exchanging information from our parents." "But we don't," I said. "Sun Mao's father warned Papa. So we have to stop being friends." It was useless to argue. "Okay, Xiaolan," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll stay away, but I'll always be your friend. You know that, don't you?" "Goodbye, Mama," she sighed and hurried away. I watched her slip through the moon gate. She didn't look back. From that day on, we faced the Suns alone. In November, the political ground shifted. Sun Mao's father came under intense criticism by Red Guards. He was labeled a capitalist ruler in power. He was stripped of his title and position and lost his authority, privileges, and status. Overnight, he and his family went from red to black. The hunters became the hunted. Sun Mao and her siblings became fair game for children of red families. I stopped worrying about them. I almost felt sorry for them. As I was coming home from school one day, I saw her father standing on a platform in the street. He was wearing a dunce cap and his head was bowed. He was being denounced and punched by former students and colleagues who, in time, would be stars on the same stage. The next day, I saw boys chasing Sun Mao's brothers down a street, flinging rocks at them. Another time, I watched with amusement as Sun Mao furtively squeezed through our moon gate and ran home. Yet, something about the Sun family made them different from my family and Xiaolan's. They could not bear suffering. They could only inflict it. One afternoon, while Sun Mao's father was being pulled around the campus like a dog on a leash, he collapsed. The Red Guards thought he was faking an ailment. They kicked him, pulled him to his feet, slapped his face, and doused him with buckets of water, but were unable to bring him to his senses. In frustration, they dragged him by the feet to his apartment building and left him. It took his wife over an hour to summon help and get him to a hospital. The doctors concluded it was not exhaustion that had caused his collapse, but a stroke. When he regained consciousness, he was unable to move or speak. He was taken home to be cared for by his family. Within a few weeks, he became pale and thin. His eyes clouded and his hair turned white and fell out. Each day, he sat strapped in a chair, staring vacantly at the floor. Sun Mao's eldest brother got out of bed one night and walked to the nearby pond. He stepped into the water, disappeared beneath the surface, and drowned. The next morning, Red Guards discovered his body, denounced him, and fed his remains to wild dogs outside the city wall. With the fall of the Suns, it was safe for Xiaolan and me to see each other. We resumed playing together and walking to school hand in hand. One morning, we passed Sun Mao sitting on the little stool in front of her apartment building. She was singing nonsense rhymes in a loud, shrill voice. When she spotted us, she stopped singing and stared as if she had never seen us before. We moved past her, and she followed us with her eyes. She erupted in ear-piercing shrieks of hysteria and started pulling at her own hair. Xiaolan and I broke into a run, and Sun Mao's cries faded behind us. Sun Mao was never united with her sanity. End of chapter 19.